The thunder cracked across the sky as Wilhelmina Gray stood over the freshly dug grave, rain pelting down on her black mourning dress, turning the dirt beneath her feet to mud. 3 days ago, her husband Thomas had been crushed when a support beam collapsed in the Downieville gold mine, leaving her alone in a town where she knew almost no one. It was 1856, and Downieville, California, was a harsh place for a widow. The gold rush town nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains had attracted thousands of fortune seekers, but few families. Now at 26, Wilhelmina Willa, to those who knew her, found herself with nothing but a small cabin on the edge of town, dwindling supplies, and no means to support herself. "Mrs. Gray," the preacher said gently, touching her elbow, "we should head back. The storm's getting worse." Willa nodded, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. She'd cried so much these past days that she felt hollow, empty, as if there were no tears left to give. Thomas had been everything to her, her husband of 5 years, her confidant, her reason for leaving her comfortable life back east for this wild frontier town. The small funeral party dispersed quickly as the rain intensified. Willa remained, staring at the crude wooden marker. She had married for love against her parents' wishes, following Thomas west when gold fever struck him. Now she was alone in a town full of rough miners and fortune hunters. "Madam," a deep voice called from behind her, "you shouldn't be out in this weather." Willa turned to see a tall man on horseback, water streaming from the brim of his hat. She recognized him vaguely, one of the cowboys who sometimes brought cattle through town to feed the miners. "I'm fine, thank you," she said, her voice barely audible above the rain. The man dismounted in a fluid motion and approached her, keeping a respectful distance. "Name's Colton Hayes, madam. I heard about your husband. My condolences." Willa nodded stiffly. "Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Let me escort you home." It wasn't a question, but it wasn't demanding either. There was genuine concern in his blue eyes, partially hidden beneath the brim of his hat. Too exhausted to argue, Willa allowed him to help her onto his horse. He walked alongside, leading the animal through the muddy streets toward her cabin. By the time they arrived, the rain had soaked through to her skin, and she was shivering uncontrollably. "You need to get dry," Colton said, helping her down at her doorstep. "Do you have anyone staying with you?" Willa shook her head. "No, no one." His expression softened. "Madam, I don't mean to be forward, but this town ain't kind to women on their own. If you need anything at all, I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Hayes, but I'll manage." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll be in town for supplies every Friday, should you change your mind." As he turned to leave, Willa felt a rush of panic at being left alone again. "Mr. Hayes," she called after him, "thank you for your kindness today." He tipped his hat, water cascading from the brim. "A storm like this is no time for anyone to be alone with their grief, Mrs. Gray." His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "And you should know, as long as I'm around, you'll never be alone again if you don't want to be." The words hung in the air between them, a promise that seemed too vast in that moment of raw grief. Without waiting for her response, he mounted his horse and rode back into the rain, leaving Willa to wonder about the cowboy's unexpected pledge. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the previous day's gloom. Willa rose early, having barely slept. The reality of her situation was inescapable in the harsh light of day. Thomas had left some savings, but not enough to last more than a few months. She would need to find work, but what could she do? Downieville offered few respectable options for a woman. A knock at her door startled her. Opening it cautiously, she found Mrs. Abernathy, the baker's wife, holding a covered basket. "I've brought you some bread and preserves, dear," the older woman said, stepping inside without invitation. "And some news you should hear." "What news?" Willa asked, accepting the basket gratefully. Mrs. Abernathy's face grew serious. "The mine owner, Mr. Ridley, is saying Thomas was negligent, that he caused the accident himself by not securing the beam properly." Willa's hands tightened on the basket. "That's a lie. Thomas was the most careful man I knew." "Of course it is, dear. But Ridley's using it as an excuse not to pay you the death benefit the other miners' widows have received." The room seemed to spin. The death benefit, a small sum paid to families of miners killed in accidents, was what Willa had been counting on to give her time to find her footing. "He can't do that," she whispered. He's a powerful man in this town, Mrs. Abernathy said, but not everyone believes him. That cowboy who brought you home yesterday, he was asking questions at the saloon last night, talking to miners who were there when it happened. Mr. Hayes. But why would he involve himself? Mrs. Abernathy patted Willa's hand. Some men still have honor, dear, especially those who have seen how rough life can be out here. After Mrs. Abernathy left, Willa sat at her small table, staring at the walls of the cabin. She'd helped Thomas build this place, hammering nails, holding beams while he secured them. It was their home, their dream. Now it felt like a cage. She changed into her only other dress and walked into town. If Ridley was spreading lies about Thomas, she needed to confront him. The mining office was a substantial building on the main street, its windows gleaming in the morning sun. Willa pushed open the door, chin held high despite her racing heart. Inside, a clerk looked up in surprise. Mrs. Gray, he said, clearly uncomfortable. I'm sorry for your loss. I need to speak with Mr. Ridley, she said firmly. He's in a meeting. It's all right, Perkins, a voice called from the back office. A moment later, Edward Ridley appeared in the doorway, a tall man with silver at his temples and cold eyes. Mrs. Gray, what can I do for you? You know why I'm here. You're dishonoring my husband's memory with lies. Ridley's expression hardened. Your husband's negligence cost me a fortune in lost production. I'm sorry for your situation, but business is business. Thomas was not negligent. He was crushed trying to warn others when the beam started to give way. That's not what witnesses say. Which witnesses? A deep voice asked from the doorway. Willa turned to see Colton Hayes filling the entrance, his tall frame silhouetted against the morning light. His presence was as unexpected as it was welcome. Ridley's face flushed. This is a private matter, Hayes. Is it? Seems to me when a man slanders the dead to save a few dollars, it becomes everybody's business. Colton stepped further into the office. I've talked to 6 men who were in that mine when Gray died. Every one of them says he shouted a warning that saved at least 4 lives before that beam crushed him. Ridley's jaw worked. Those men work for me. They'll say what I tell them to say. Not anymore, they won't, Colton said quietly. Words spreading about how you treat the families of men who die making you rich. You might find it hard to hire miners soon. The mine owner's face darkened. Are you threatening me? Just stating facts. Mrs. Gray is owed a death benefit, the same as any widow. Willa watched the exchange in amazement. This man, practically a stranger, was standing up for her. For Thomas's memory, Ridley looked from Colton to Willa, calculation in his eyes. Fine, she'll get her money, but I want her to sign a paper saying she has no further claims. That's fair, Colton said before Willa could respond. An hour later, Willa walked out of the mining office with enough money to last her several months if she was careful. Colton walked beside her, silent until they reached the edge of town. Why did you do that? She finally asked, stopping to face him. You don't even know me. Colton removed his hat, turning it in his hands. I knew your husband, actually, not well, but I respected him. 6 months ago, my wagon broke down outside town. He helped me fix it, refused payment, said that's what neighbors do. Tears pricked at Willa's eyes. That sounds like Thomas. A man like that deserves to be remembered right. Colton replaced his hat. And a woman like you deserves better than being left with nothing. I don't know how to thank you, no need for thanks. But my offer stands if you need anything, my ranch isn't far. As he turned to go, Willa called after him. Mr. Hayes, I'm grateful truly, but I can't help wondering why a cattle rancher is so invested in a miner's widow. He looked back, a small smile touching his lips. Maybe I just believe no one should have to face the hard times alone. With that, he walked away, leaving Willa with more questions than answers about the enigmatic cowboy. Over the next weeks, Willa began to rebuild her life. The death benefit gave her breathing room, but she knew she needed a more permanent solution. She took in mending and laundry from the miners, work that was beneath her education but necessary for survival. Each Friday, true to his word, Colton Hayes came to town. He always found a reason to pass by her cabin bringing fresh game one week, offering to fix her leaking roof the next. His visits became a bright spot in her grief-shadowed days. One Friday in late April, Willa was hanging laundry when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She turned, expecting to see Colton, but instead found Edward Ridley. Mrs. Gray, he said, not bothering to dismount. I've come with a proposition for you. Willa tensed. What kind of proposition? I'm willing to buy your cabin. It's on land that could be valuable for mining. This is my home, Mr. Ridley. It's not for sale. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm offering twice what it's worth. Be sensible. What future do you have here? A pretty widow like you should return east, start fresh. The implication that she couldn't make it on her own stoked a fire in Willa's chest. Thank you for your concern, but my answer is no. Ridley's face hardened. Think carefully, Mrs. Gray. Downieville can be a dangerous place for those who don't have protection. Before Willa could respond to the thinly veiled threat, another rider approached. Colton Hayes pulled his horse to a stop beside them, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. Ridley, he nodded curtly. Paying social calls now, business, Hayes, not that it's any concern of yours. When it involves Mrs. Gray, I make it my concern. The tension between the two men crackled in the air. Ridley finally broke eye contact, turning back to Willa. My offer stands for 1 week. After that, he let the sentence hang unfinished, then rode away. Are you all right? Colton asked once Ridley was out of earshot. He wants to buy my land, Willa said, hands trembling slightly, and I don't think he's used to hearing no. Colton dismounted, tying his horse to her fence post. May I? He gestured toward her porch. They sat side by side on the rough-hewn bench Thomas had built. Willa explained Ridley's offer and his veiled threats. He won't stop, Colton said after she finished. Men like Ridley are used to taking what they want. This was Thomas's dream, our dream. I can't just give it up. No one's saying you should. Colton looked out over the small property. But you should know what you're up against. Ridley controls most of this town, the mine, the assay office, even has the sheriff in his pocket. Then what can I do? Fight, but not alone. He turned to face her. Willa, I have a proposition of my own. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. Come work for me at my ranch. I need someone to keep the books, manage the household. The place is a mess since my housekeeper left to get married. You're offering me a job as your housekeeper. As my ranch manager, he corrected. You'd have your own cabin, good pay, and most importantly, you'd be away from Ridley's influence. Willa stood, pacing the small porch. And what about this place? Thomas is buried here. I can't just abandon it. You wouldn't be. You'd still own it. But you'd be safe while we figure out how to handle Ridley. We? She questioned, pausing to look at him. Yes, we. His blue eyes held her steadily. I told you before, you don't have to be alone in this. Something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. Over these weeks, Colton Hayes had become more than just a kind stranger. He'd become a friend, perhaps the only true one she had in Downieville. I need time to think, she finally said. He nodded, rising to leave. Take all the time you need, but Ridley won't wait long, and neither will I. Spring cattle drive starts in 2 weeks, and I need someone minding the ranch while I'm gone. After he left, Willa sat alone on the porch until darkness fell. The logical choice seemed clear, but leaving felt like betraying Thomas, abandoning their shared dream. Yet staying might mean losing everything to Ridley's machinations. Her decision came in the dead of night, when 3 masked men tried to set fire to her barn. She fought them off with Thomas's shotgun, firing into the air until they fled. By dawn, she had packed her essential belongings and saddled the old mare Thomas had bought for her 2 years prior. The Hayes Ranch was exactly where Colton had described, 5 miles outside town, nestled in a verdant valley with mountains rising behind it. It was larger than she'd expected, with a main house, several outbuildings, and a separate small cabin that she assumed would be hers. Colton emerged from the barn as she approached, wiping his hands on a rag. His surprise at seeing her quickly gave way to concern when he noticed her soot-stained dress and tired eyes. What happened? He demanded, helping her down from the mare. Willa explained the night's events, watching his expression darken with each word. Ridley's men, he said grimly, had to be. I came to accept your offer, she said, if it still stands. Of course it does. He took her small traveling bag. Let me show you where you'll stay. The cabin was simple but clean, with a bedroom, small sitting area, and a lean-to kitchen. It had been freshly swept and aired as if he'd been expecting her. It's not much, he said, watching her take in the space. It's perfect, she replied honestly. After the terror of the previous night, the cabin felt like a sanctuary. Get some rest, he told her. We'll talk about your duties tomorrow. True to his word, Colton gave her time to settle in before explaining her responsibilities. She would manage the household accounts, oversee supplies, and during his absence on cattle drives, make decisions about the day-to-day operations of the ranch. "You're giving me a lot of authority," she commented after he finished explaining. "I trust you," he said simply, "and I need someone I can trust when I'm not here." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Willa learned the workings of the ranch. Colton was a patient teacher, explaining everything from how to negotiate with suppliers to which hands could be trusted with which tasks. The ranch employed 6 permanent workers and hired additional help during busy seasons. Despite her initial reservations, Willa found herself enjoying the work. It was challenging in a way that laundry and mending never had been, engaging both her mind and her education. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt useful, needed. The night before Colton was to leave on the cattle drive, he invited her to dinner in the main house. She arrived to find the usually sparse dining room transformed with candles and the good china. "What's the occasion?" she asked, surprised by the effort. "Last decent meal for a month," he said with a smile, pulling out her chair. "Thought we should make it special." Over dinner, they talked of the ranch, the upcoming drive, and his plans for expanding his herd. It was only when they moved to the porch with coffee that the conversation turned personal. "You never talk about before," he said, watching her profile in the fading light. "Your life before Downieville." Willa sipped her coffee, considering her response. "There's not much to tell. I grew up in Boston. My father is a professor. I was expected to marry well, have children, host dinner parties. And instead you married a miner and came west." "Thomas wasn't a miner when I met him. He was studying engineering." She smiled at the memory. "But he always had wanderlust. When news of gold reached Boston, he couldn't resist. I chose to follow rather than stay behind. You loved him very much." "I did." Her voice softened. "He was a good man." Colton nodded, looking out at the darkening landscape. "My wife died too, 6 years ago." The revelation startled Willa. "I didn't know you were married." "Rebecca was from back east like you, wasn't prepared for frontier life, died in childbirth, the baby too." His voice was steady, but Willa could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I'm so sorry, Colton. It was a long time ago, but I understand what it's like to build a life with someone and then lose them, to wonder if you can ever build another." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. "I should go," Willa said finally, breaking the spell. "You have an early start tomorrow." He walked her back to her cabin, stopping at the door. "I'll be gone about a month. If Ridley or his men show up here, Frank knows to send a rider after me immediately." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Go do what you need to do." He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek so gently she might have imagined it. "Be safe, Willa." The cattle drive took Colton away for longer than expected, nearly 6 weeks instead of 4. In his absence, Willa threw herself into ranch work, learning every aspect of the operation. She kept meticulous books, negotiated fair prices with suppliers, and even helped the hands brand the new spring calves. True to Colton's prediction, Ridley did not give up easily. 2 weeks into Colton's absence, he arrived at the ranch, ostensibly to discuss water rights but clearly to intimidate Willa. She received him in the main house, with Frank, Colton's foreman, and 2 ranch hands within calling distance. "You've made a mistake, Mrs. Gray," Ridley said, declining the coffee she offered. "Hayes won't protect you forever." "I don't need protection, Mr. Ridley. I need to be left alone to live my life. That cabin of yours, I'll have it one way or another." Willa met his gaze steadily. "Then you'll have to go through the courts. I've filed my deed with the Territorial Land Office in Sacramento. Everything is legal and proper." Ridley's surprise was evident. "You've been busy." "I have. I've also written detailed accounts of your threats and the attack on my property, copies of which are with my father in Boston and the territorial governor." It was a bluff she hadn't written to the governor, but Ridley had no way of knowing that. The mine owner studied her for a long moment, recalculating. "You're more trouble than that piece of land is worth," he finally said, rising to leave. "Then perhaps we understand each other at last," Willa replied calmly. After Ridley left, Willa collapsed into a chair, her bravado evaporating. Frank, who had been listening from the next room, brought her a glass of water. "The boss would be proud," the grizzled foreman said, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. "Not many stand up to Ridley like that." The incident strengthened Willa's standing with the ranch hands, who had initially been skeptical of a woman in charge. As the weeks passed, they came to respect her decisions and even seek her advice. When Colton finally returned, driving 200 head of cattle before him, Willa felt a rush of joy she hadn't expected. She watched from the porch as he directed the hands to move the herd into the north pasture, his tall figure unmistakable even at a distance. He found her in the office later, reviewing the books. His face was sunburned, his clothes trail-worn, but his smile was warm as ever. "Welcome back," she said, rising to greet him. "It's good to be home." He glanced at the ledgers spread across the desk. "How did things go in my absence?" "Well enough, we had a visit from Ridley." Colton's expression darkened. "Did he threaten you?" he tried. Willa explained the encounter, watching as his concern gave way to admiration. "You stood up to him alone. That took courage." "Not alone," she corrected. "Frank and the boys were nearby. They've been very protective." Colton nodded approvingly. "They respect you. Frank says you've been running the place like you were born to it." His praise warmed her. "I've enjoyed the work more than I expected. It shows." He moved closer, studying her face. "You look different, stronger." "I feel different," she admitted. "For the first time since Thomas died, I feel like myself again." Something shifted in Colton's gaze. "Willa, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer." She nodded, suddenly nervous. "Do you think you could be happy here, not just working, but living, making a life?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. "I think I already am," she said softly. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "When I first saw you at your husband's grave, I knew you were special. The way you stood there in the rain, refusing to leave him, that kind of loyalty, that kind of heart, is rare." Willa felt tears threatening. "Colton, let me finish. I'm not asking you to forget him. I would never ask that, but I'm hoping there might be room in your heart for something new." Someone new. The words she had both feared and longed for were finally spoken. 6 months after Thomas's death, she stood at another crossroads. The guilt she expected to feel didn't come. Instead, there was a sense of rightness, as if Thomas himself would approve of this man who had protected her when she was most vulnerable. "I'm not ready to marry again," she said honestly. "Not yet. I'm not asking for marriage, not today." Colton's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm asking if you'll let me court you properly, if you'll give us a chance to see what might grow between us." Willa looked up into his face, seeing the hope and fear mingled in his blue eyes. This man who had told her she would never be alone again had kept his promise in ways neither of them could have imagined that rainy day. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'd like that very much." His smile transformed his face, years falling away with his relief. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, a beginning rather than a demand. When they separated, Willa felt a lightness she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's accident. Not an erasure of grief, but the promise of joy alongside it. The possibility of a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Over the following months, Colton courted her with a patience and thoughtfulness that deepened her feelings for him. They worked side by side during the day, building the ranch into something more prosperous than it had been. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch of the main house, talking about books, dreams, and occasionally their lost loved ones. Ridley eventually sold his mining operation and left Downieville, driven out by falling gold yields and rising labor costs. Without his influence, the town began to change, becoming less of a rough mining camp and more of a proper settlement. Willa kept her cabin, visiting occasionally to tend Thomas's grave, but the Hayes Ranch became her true home. On Christmas Eve, nearly a year after Thomas's death, Colton asked Willa to marry him. They stood in the main house before a decorated pine tree, surrounded by the ranch hands who had become like family. "You've brought life back to this place," he told her, holding out a simple gold band. "And to me, I love you, Willa. Will you be my wife?" Willa looked at the man before her, strong, honorable, patient, and at the faces of the people watching. In this remote ranch, she had found a community, a purpose, and a love she hadn't believed possible after such loss. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will." They were married on New Year's Day, 1858, in the small church in Downieville. The town turned out for the wedding, many curious to see the miner's widow who had defied Ridley and found happiness with the rancher. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, snow beginning to fall around them, Willa looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Are you happy?" Colton asked, following her gaze. "More than I thought possible," she answered truthfully. "I used to think happiness was something you found once, and if you lost it, that was the end. And now," she turned to him, snow catching in her eyelashes, "now I know it's something you build over and over, something you choose even when it's difficult." He pulled his horse closer to hers, reaching across to take her hand. "I chose you the moment I saw you standing in that cemetery, and I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of our lives. And I'll choose you," she promised, squeezing his hand. "My cowboy who promised I'd never be alone again." As they crested the hill overlooking the ranch their home, Willa felt a sense of peace settle over her. The grief for Thomas would always be part of her, but it no longer defined her. Ahead lay a future bright with possibility, alongside a man who understood both loss and love and the precious gift of beginning again. Spring came early to the Sierra Nevada foothills in 1859. The ranch bloomed with new life, calves in the pastures, wildflowers on the hillsides, and a son born to Willa and Colton Hayes as the first leaves unfurled on the oaks. They named him Thomas Colton Hayes, honoring both the past and the present as they looked toward the future together.